Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 200 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you to find and define your own answer to this question. I'm hoping the guest musings, explorations, curiosities, and experiences prompt your own inquiry into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 83rd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, and I'm delighted to introduce Tom Morgan as our guest. Tom has spent the last 20 years in the markets, on both the buy and sell sides. He has worked at several investment banks on Wall Street, with his most recent role being with the wealth manager Sapient Capital. He describes himself as a curiosity sherpa. He spends his life seeking out the most interesting ideas and thinkers for curious people. He has just co-founded The Leading Edge, a network for curious people focused on their personal evolution, and he is also the writer of the Leading Edge newsletter on Substack. He graduated from Oxford University with an MA in politics, philosophy, and economics. In this enlightening conversation, Tom muses on whether we realize the universe loves us. He shares his experience of struggling with mental and spiritual health, highlights the significance of experiencing flow in a meaningful way, discusses the importance of being honest with ourselves and the world around us, and explores the relationship between disclosing truth and the synchronicity we experience. Throughout this conversation, Tom shares many insightful anecdotes and experiences, making this episode ideal for anyone feeling stuck in life, considering career transitions, facing challenges with their well-being, or struggling to see the signs that the world or the universe may be offering. Look, I took so much from this conversation. Tom is a rare individual in terms of his insight, curiosity, intellect, but also the really lived and felt experiences of what he's pointing to. So I think you're going to take a lot from this episode. And if you enjoy this conversation, please like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. While if you're on the podcasting platforms, I'd greatly appreciate your reviews at this stage of my podcasting journey. Please check out the show notes below if you want to check out more of Tom's work at The Leading Edge and his newsletter. And indeed for ways of contacting me, whether it's for your own personal self-inquiry or building trust and human relationships amongst groups, or indeed the podcast newsletters where you can see my reflections on what the conversations you're listening to have evoked in me. So that's all I have to say before this week's interview. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week. And so without further ado, the 83rd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Tom, thank you so much for joining me on the What is a Good Life podcast today. After being made aware of your work through a very good friend of mine, I've been really intrigued to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So, Tom, as I tend to kick these conversations off with, it is with the question of, is there a question you're trying to answer as you move through life?
Yeah. Does the universe love me? Because I think it's the one that if people could answer would change the world overnight the most. The way I think about it is there's a lot of people stuck in loveless marriages. And by that is a metaphor for their careers, right? They're doing something that everyone else is doing because everyone else is doing it, despite the fact that it isn't really satisfactory to anyone. But they do it because they have this intrinsic fear that if they let go, they'll be alone and they'll be in chaos and they'll be unloved. And I wondered that if you were willing to get out of that relationship, you would find something where you were intrinsically loved. And that if people could find very categorically this mix of where what they loved, following their bliss in a way that was integrated with the world, which is something I think we should discuss because it's neglected and critical, that the world would align around them. This all sounds quite abstract and trivial until you think like, okay, imagine if everyone believed that to be true and it was true. And it was actually true. Like, I think it's the craziest, most heretical idea in the world that if we found the right path, we could leave the one that we weren't enjoying. The global population of accountants would drop 98% overnight. No one would be doing rubbish jobs. Everyone would be looking to manifest their full self-expression. Everyone would be dropping into a niche that was designed for them. It would be total economic catastrophe. But I wonder as well, like if you believe the universe is both loving and intelligence, the idea that the market economy somehow exists outside of that system is just this weird intellectual quirk. So it's like maybe the world we live in would actually be intelligent enough to realign around that. That is the question I've had, and that's actually the question I forced myself to answer when I started my new business, which is that if I find something that I've been working around for years and been thinking about for years and think that the world needs, all not givens, if I do it, will I be quote unquote rewarded?
And for you, how did that initial question even emerge for you? Like, does the universe love me? Like, what contributed to that being something that was present in your existence?
I look for dots all the time, right? Like I've spent my life trying to cultivate this sense of pattern recognition, and all the dots I've ever found in my life seem to be pointing towards this with a level of like 70% confidence, where like the 30% is like, dude, you moron, you've lost your mind, the universe is an indifferent box, get a real job, and that's still a thing. And some days that's 50%, some days that's 70%, but mostly it's 30%. The other 70% is that I've seen enough now in my life and other people's lives to believe that there's something a little bit more mysterious going on. That when you find that right mix, something special happens. Something unpredictable happens, but something special happens. And I mean, we can talk about it to the extent that you want, but I spent the better part of 20 years in jobs that I initially enjoyed and then very, very much did not enjoy. But then I looked around at the end of that time being very, very well compensated. And I appreciate this as a total cliche, but like being really well compensated in an investment bank and looking around and finding all these other men, average age 45, who were just clinging on. They had no interest in what they were doing anymore. They were told there was no second act for them. And I saw a lot of suicide. I saw suicide and I saw metaphorical suicide where people just kind of gave up and numbed the call to adventure through whatever circumstances they had available to them. And I was like, this is wild. This is wild. This is millions of people. This is millions upon millions of people who everyone ignores because they're earning a decent amount of money and they don't think there's a way out. And so that led me to this question, which is like, to what degree are we free? Some degree, like we can't leave our families, but to what degree we are free. And my attempt to answer that question through my work and my life has been like all consuming.
I love this question: to what degree are we free? And also the acknowledgement of almost a strata of society where you almost think from the outside that freedom would be inherent, that it would go along with the financial trappings. I used to work in finance as well. Um, this question, like what came up for you when you, like what came even under the idea of freedom for you, like when you were exploring that question for yourself?
Yeah, I think that actually goes into maybe helping define this flow concept. I've realized that freedom has come to mean the ability to flow in a way that's meaningful. So for me, to make it tangible, my current routine is I'll wake up whatever time my 5-year-old crawls into bed. It's out of my control. I'll say like 6:30 on average. I'll be at my desk 7:30, and then I'll write until I go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at noon, which has been the single most positive contributor to my life from an exercise perspective. I'll do that for an hour, and then I'll come back to my desk and I'll meet people. I'll try and meet 3, 4, 5 people a day. New people, mostly with no explicit agenda. And then I'll spend the rest of the day with my kids or my friends. And at the moment, I can do that forever. The morning flow is meaningful because I believe I'm writing about things that other people care about. And I have been shown that to a limited extent through my audience, right? So it's not just... The thing about flow is it has to be meaningful. Like slot machines are weaponized flow generators. Video games are weaponized flow generators, but they are flow generators in a closed system. You are not offering anything to the world. And the reason why my daily routine works is because I feel I am offering something to the world that it values. And I have been shown that some people value it. the Brazilian jiu-jitsu, aside from my opponents, is a closed system, right? I'm not pretending that I'm going to be a professional jiu-jitsu like fighter. It's a closed system, and I have to acknowledge that. But then I go back to another open system, which is the meetings, where hopefully other people benefit from meeting me as much as I benefit from meeting them. And the level of serendipity in my life over the last few years has been out of control because I try and never turn a meeting down. That's freedom.
Can you give me a sense of what that serendipity has looked like for you? Like, or has there been even a moment within it where life has felt borderline surreal based on how perhaps you used to perceive life?
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. And there is one idea that I think can change most people's lives, and it's the concept of synchronicity. Synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence. And the critical word is meaningful. The thing about a synchronicity is it is a felt sense. It is something that is embodied. So if you ever attempt to explain a synchronicity to someone else, it always comes out feeling hollow or even borderline psychotic because it doesn't have the felt sense of significance that you have. But what I have noticed is the density of synchronicity seems to increase when you're on the right path. And this goes back to something that I think is wildly neglected from like what we initially were talking about the love of the universe, is that like I think people understand that they need to get to a point where their life kind of feels like play, but they don't understand that the environment that we live in, however weird and mysterious it is, needs to acknowledge what you're doing in a positive direction. And because we live in a world where most of us, I think, believe that we live in this kind of indifferent dead box of material and atoms, the idea that our environment would be intelligent enough to signal back to us when we're on the right path is just kind of like a meh, like you've lost your mind. And yet I've seen so many people, person after person after person after person, the moment they even acknowledge the possibility of synchronicity, things go bananas. And then they end up with this alternative intelligence helping guide their lives.
For you, just even the way you talk, even about like, at one point to 70% confidence, or attributing figures to this, and obviously with the background that you touched on as well. What is that like for you then, addressing something mysterious, or something that even when you put words to it or put labels to it, it's almost dead on arrival, versus the experience or the resonance that it generates when it's embodied? What's it been like for you to almost traverse across different modes of interpreting life, I guess?
Yeah. There's a really great book by a guy called Peter Kingsley called Catafalque. It's a weird word. It means like a funeral support system, like something that holds up a coffin. And it's about Carl Jung, who's been one of like the foundational figures of my kind of personal exploration, because that guy had seen some stuff, man. And he talks about how Carl Jung was a prophet, in that he could see what was wrong with society and he could see what needed to be done. It's kind of an unusual combination. But Jung was like, the voice crying out in the wilderness can only speak in the language of science. And I think we exist in this place, both within most of our psyches, speaking for myself at least, but also as a culture, where the moment you go into like full woo, right? Like the, crystals, new age stuff, it doesn't have enough discernment. It doesn't have enough groundedness. It doesn't have enough agency. It doesn't have enough ability to action. And I think you need to balance that with a little bit of like, all right, okay, like, what do I do with this information? Right. Okay. So UFOs exist. Great. How am I going to behave differently? My wife looks at me as like, great. Is this going to make you a better dad? Is this going to make you a better husband? Like, is this topic interesting to you? And I think that you have to live in the mystery, but you have to work out how the mystery is going to inform your action. I'm, as you may have noticed, I don't know how much of my stuff you've read, I'm kind of obsessed with this hemispheric model that Ian McGilchrist developed. It is the single most powerful explanatory model I've ever encountered. But you have this story of Jill Bolte Taylor, a neuroanatomist who had a massive left hemispheric stroke, and she found herself in the shower, like basically experiencing nirvana. She was one with everything. It was glorious. Her senses had blown open. I've actually had a similar experience, I think, which was hemispherically related, and it is just glorious. Love feels like the foundation of everything. And then she gets out of the shower because she's a neuroanatomist. She realizes she's having a stroke, and so tries to call an ambulance, and she can't do it because she's lost all left hemispheric function. She can't use a phone. And for me, that's a great metaphor for how to approach spirituality, is that a lot of people in the spiritual community haven't ever developed the ego structure to be effective. And they just get lost in language and kind of chasing states where it's like, wow, that felt awfully good. Can I dedicate the rest of my life to finding that feeling again? When actually we don't need that right now. We need people with agency and a connection to the mystery. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
No, it does completely. Could you elaborate though on what your experience was, just when you said you had something that almost left you in nirvana?
Yeah, it's weird, man. So the context is that I'd spent 11 years in finance. It had been fantastic. I then hung on for a few more years, too many, and I started to get really sick. I was in a place that was filled with pretty desperate people, but was very friendly. There just wasn't enough to do. And as a result, my body and psyche started breaking down. My unconscious was trying to get my attention, but because I was being really well paid, had a nice big title, all the cliche stuff, I wouldn't let go. And there's a great line from C.S. Lewis, which is, God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains. And he was shouting louder and louder, dude, if you stay here forever, you're going to die like all these other people. So I couldn't find anything wrong with me, despite doing a tour of the entire US healthcare system. But they do not have the tools to diagnose a spiritual sickness. And then I got told to do an elimination diet, which is when basically you cut everything out of your diet so they can work out if it's dietary related. And I then got so much clarity and energy that I ended up writing a book. But looking back, it wasn't really a book. It was like a 60-page PDF of anything I'd ever found resonant. And this is an incredibly powerful exercise, because what I realized was, when something resonates, what's it resonating with? It's not resonating with your spleen, right? It's resonating with your soul. Otherwise, it wouldn't resonate. Things resonate for you that don't resonate for me. And I realized that I was constructing everything that was ever important to me. And my focus was on the hero's journey. And there was this moment one morning when I was finishing the book, and I'd been getting like manic levels of energy and not really sleeping. So I don't think I was like entirely mentally healthy. But I realized that the hero's journey was an operating manual for personal transition. And I realized that I was that book. And suddenly I just started giggling. And I saw the Tao, as in like the Tao Te Ching. I saw what it was, and I felt connected to it, which was weird because I wasn't even really a big part of my work up until that point. And suddenly my senses blew open. The monologue in my head stopped. So it was just total tranquility, and I became bathed in utterly indescribable, unconditional love. But was still like totally lucid. So I like walked outside. I could see energy licking off the leaves of the trees, and I could see and hear everything. It was like that movie Limitless, where basically my senses had gone like, Pachoo! There were then a series of increasingly bizarre synchronicities. But I like went and had a meeting with like the CIO of a hedge fund, right? Like I was not like raving mad. I was just a bit floaty. And anyway, but I came home and saw my wife, and my wife was like, you are not well right now. You are having some sort of crazy psychotic break. And then the other thing that I noticed amongst many that day was that every time I said something I didn't actually believe, my heart hurt. Physically, my heart actually physically hurt. And I realized I had this connection where if I was saying stuff just with my head, the heart would call it out. And I was like, well, shit, how often am I feeling that in real life? And I'm suppressing that feeling. I then oscillated between two personalities, one terrified and dull, total flat affect in the voice, no emotion whatsoever, and pure terror, where time slowed to a crawl, and the other one where I was floaty, blissful, fully engaged, fully present, centered, and time was this golden river. I alternated between those two states for a couple of months, with increasing severity, with decreasing severity. Just kind of eventually it settled out. Eventually my senses kind of closed back up again, which was merciful because I live in Manhattan. And then after that, I embarked upon a 2-year dark night of the soul, which I guess we could talk about later if you're interested.
What the hell is that like in terms of just even the tranquility of the mind to then even to be lucid or to be aware of the experience as it's occurring? And like, what's it like just to interface with people, especially in Manhattan, just people going about their day? Like, did that provide some really strange kind of, I don't know, contrast to the experience that you were embodying at that time?
Anyone that came within 12 feet of me, I could feel their emotional state. So they'll walk past me and I was like, oh, that guy's really angry. And then someone else would walk past me and be like, oh, that guy's having a really good day. And I could literally feel it kind of heart to heart. And people would come up to me and I could tell how open or closed their heart was. It was wild. But there's a lot of people in Manhattan, so it was totally overwhelming. So it genuinely felt like a superpower. But also, that night I went to IMAX because to my wife I was like, let's keep things normal as possible. Like I don't want to be weird. So I went to IMAX and it immediately put me asleep within like 5 minutes because the sensory impact was so overwhelming that I was so open it was a catastrophe. And when I went to a restaurant in Manhattan, if there was any crosstalk on the table at all, I couldn't function. It was just too overwhelming to have two channels of conversation. And obviously every conversation has two channels. So I could only go to restaurants that were really, 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 really quiet. So it was utterly overwhelming. But then the flip side was like, part of me was like, oh, is this available all the time? One of the problems in my life is that once you've experienced something like this, you're always thinking about it. At least
Right.
I am. Which is like, oh my God, I've been to heaven. And no moment of my waking existence has ever come close to it. And for a long time afterwards, it kind of broke my daily life because I was like, am I ever going to go back there? Can I go back there? Like, if I perfect myself and my soul, will that be my experience? Will that be my destiny? And I think to go back to the spiritual stuff earlier, I think that can lead to this kind of renunciation where you're like, man, that was so good. If I just dedicate myself to meditating all the time, I can probably get back there. And you're seeing this at the moment with the guys chasing the jhana states in Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
something that makes me like intrinsically nervous. But I still like every time I talk about it or think about it, I'm like, wow, wouldn't it be nice to have that all the time?
But some of the insights that even came from that, like the example of you saying that perhaps if there's something that your heart didn't consider to be true, like that it would actually cause pain to your heart. Like I took a sabbatical a number of years ago and I wandered around with a notepad, and when you do tally marks, just literally, it wasn't this self-flagellating experience. I was just like, "Holy shit! I've lied to myself about a substantial narrative in my life." So now I was just making marks every time I told either an embellishment, my intentions weren't coherent with what I was presenting to somebody else, and it was amazing to see. But I think the thing that became more interesting to me, it wasn't that if someone goes around calling each other liars, it's the things that we inflict upon ourselves by playing certain games or deceiving ourselves. Like I always think there's an amazing capacity we have to do that. So I think that's a beautiful felt experience of like, oh my God, my heart hurts when I do that. Like even to know that on some subtle level that can be occurring.
One of my favorite expressions is love is mutually accelerating disclosure, which is like whenever you've been on a date with someone you're falling in love with and you just start telling them everything and then they start telling you everything. In fact, there's this really cool study that a guy called Arthur Aaron did where he got 36 questions and he got two people from opposite genders, strangers, to ask these questions to each other and then stare into each other's eyes for 4 minutes. And I did it. I've been married for 10 years. I did it with my wife on date night. And like a lot of the questions, well, no, a few of the questions were kind of redundant because we knew that about each other, but a surprisingly large amount were not. and they increase in intensity. I'd really recommend anyone listening to do it because it was a really deepening exercise for us, because what it is mutually accelerating disclosure. But I've come to believe reality works the same way, that the more you show of yourself, and you have to show first, the more reality shows back. I gave an interview this time last year to a friend about what it's like to really be very mentally ill in Manhattan. Like all of these crazy spiritual experiences, like psychotic depression, the ketamine therapy that got me out, all of this stuff. And I was like, I'm notionally like a serious professional, right? And I have some sort of professional identity, although I hold that pretty loosely. Like this could get me fired. This is an unapproved interview that I've given off on the side. And instead, that evening, a woman called Mona Sabani reached out to me, and she had had a similar crisis of rationality, and she wrote a book essentially going through the evidence in favor of psychic and spiritual phenomena. And that her work was the biggest single confrontation to my worldview that I've ever experienced. So basically, it was as if the universe was like, all right, you have just given the most open and vulnerable account of yourself that you've ever given in public. As a result, we are going to respond immediately by showing you something that you've never seen before, and you need to see, because it will take you in a positive new direction that you weren't expecting. And Mona has since become a really good friend, and she's introduced me to another one of her friends who's become a really good friend, and they have opened my eyes. So it's this whole idea of like, when you lie to yourself, you close off that channel. And when you lie to others, you close off that channel, and people can't work out who you are.
Yeah. And you can't even work out who you are. Like it can be a real entangled web, if you know what I mean.
Well, I think about this idea. Sorry, I wanted
No,
to
no,
say
please.
something. I think about this idea. Dante's third circle of hell is, sorry, not third, the final circle of hell is Satan trapped up to his chest in ice because he betrayed God's love. And I think that works as a metaphor, because it's when we refuse to leave a circumstance that's not working for us, as I was saying at the beginning, it's like we're betraying God's love, right? We don't believe we are loved, and we don't have faith in that love. And as a result, we don't move. And when we don't move, we get stuck. We close ourselves off to that potential direction that we can get in life, that flow that we can get in life. So we're actually betraying ourselves. And as a result of betraying ourselves and not letting that love in, we get stuck. And that's something I think about all the time, which is when you betray that sense of external love, you get stuck. And you can do that by closing yourself off, by closing your heart and refusing to take these external signals, whether they be synchronicity or whatever.
When did I know I asked you about the question, does the universe love me? And you mentioned your kind of steps into that. When did love become so explicitly a kind of focus for your inquiry? I when I interviewed over 100 people around this question, one thing that I was really surprised at was it was like less than 15% explicitly used the word love. And to me, that was always one of the most interesting things about this. Like they inferred it through children, partners, family, friends. But I was kind of amazed at just how infrequent the word came up. For you, has that been something deliberate? Is that something that you've noticed that is more sparse than it needs to be, or how do you perceive that?
It's linguistic failure. It's like we're talking about with Jung and the science of language. I once read that Sanskrit has 96 words for love, and instead we have to shag our Labradors, right? That basically, like, I love my Labrador. Does that mean I want to have sex with it? Well, no. Like, think of all of the times, like, you know, you and me are from roughly the same part of the world. Think about all those times you've wanted to tell your friends you love them, your male friends, right? Or your female
Mm.
friends. And it's just so hard because there's so many things tied into it, which is that, like, I love you, man, but no, like not like that. Not like
Yeah, yeah.
not like the sex way. And that for me is one of the greatest tragedies of our language, that I believe experientially that the flow of consciousness, the evolution of consciousness, feels like love. And our ability to navigate that flow is determined by our ability to feel that sensitivity of love. The problem is that, excuse me, when you use the word love, brings in all the other 95 kinds of love that it could be. So the other words that I think about are attractors. I think the most interesting topic in the world is attractors. That basically, how do you navigate a complex adaptive system? Through what attracts you, through what you are drawn to. It is evolution's way of solving a problem, right? So, like, what I find interesting, what I am curious about, what I am drawn to, what I am attracted to, what I love. That is how you know what to follow in life. But you also need it to love you back, which is the concept of synchronicity. So, love is the most important thing, but also, like, do we have the physical sensitivity to determine what kind of love it is? And do we have the emotional granularity to actually even express it when we get it? Which is why people don't talk about it, because it sounds so cheesy.
Just intrigued to know. I know you mentioned the idea of doing this interview last year, and then what that, almost what the universe reciprocated in ways in who you met through having that conversation. What enabled you, or what gave you the comfort to go first? Like in a number of different areas in your life, what comes to mind for you from that perspective?
Yeah, I go on a bunch of podcasts, and the next week, 5 to 10 people can DM me on Twitter or email me or just find me on LinkedIn or something. And they'll be like, dude, I thought it was just me. And I'm like, no, you're the ninth person this week, and it's just me. And I don't even have a large audience, right?
Right.
And this sense of shame, aloneness, um, I've come to believe that midlife actually often requires a transition. It requires a transition from being egoically driven in a really positive way. You've just got a whole bunch of professional skills that you can use. You've just got a container that you can use. You've got things that are really valuable, but then you invert those in service of something that you find meaningful. And that sense of meaning is shown to you by the universe and synchronicity. But that transition process can often require ego death. So, like, and that's a really horrifyingly severe experience for a lot of people. And a lot of other more advanced cultures that we think are backwards had containers and societal processes to hold people in those transitions. And because our culture is so badly set up for them, it can often take 3 years. Spouses are not equipped for 3 years of this. We're not professionally equipped for 3 years of this if we're sole earners. Even if we don't have any burdens, 3 years of just screwing around is like a stupidly long amount of time when we have no settled identity. Hey, dude, what do you do for a living? Like that question is like a dagger to the heart for anyone in that process. And I
It's
was like, and then,
woeful.
oh, dude. And then you lay it onto that, you live in Manhattan. You lay it onto that, you're mentally ill, right? You've got the ultimate I realized, like, very early on in my process, having, at the time, I was a long time ago, so I was 36 at the time, but I was diagnosed mentally ill. Having been like a really successful person, overnight I was disabled and mentally ill, and also told I was never getting better. So I lost everything overnight. And then I not only got better, I'm better than I was before I went into it. So the lack of hope and all of these things, I was like, I'd written a book. So, like, I was like, at one point I'm going to publish a book. So all this is coming out anyway. But I shared with the intention of helping other people. And I think that's actually a really critical thing, which is that, like, there's manipulative sharing where you're trauma dumping or whatever it is. You're trying to create a connection. But then the sharing where it's like, screw it. If someone else hears this, it might help them.
And so the more you've experienced that, just that continues to be a feedback, or there continues to be evidence for you that this is just something that's like overwhelmingly positive, even for your own sense of well-being then as well.
I think so. I mean, you've got to read the room, like, part of the benefit of the internet. Someone said, your vibe attracts your tribe. And I didn't really have a peer group that I could talk to about any of this stuff. And then I've increasingly found that online by being candid in my own experiences and people finding me who are going through theirs. And that's the reason why I've founded the business that I founded. But it's more that, like, you need, in my opinion, a group of people who you can have these kinds of conversations and have this kind of discussion with. I think depressingly, that's why therapy is such a big deal. I'm actually pretty lukewarm on the benefits of therapy in general when you're going through a really significant crisis. But actually, the therapists are often people that you can tell the truth to. But that makes me really sad because, like, why should you be paying someone to tell the truth to someone? And often you can't even tell the truth to your partner. And I understand there's a role for that. But the idea that people are so ashamed of what's inside of them, they can only tell it to someone who's like legally bound not to tell anyone else,
Yeah.
strikes me as a suboptimal dynamic. That all of us contain darkness. We should be able to tell other people.
It's like it blows my mind sometimes just how frequently, wherever I've gone with sharing something, how somebody can just look at you, or if somebody shares something with me, sometimes someone could share something that you'd say is in air quotes vulnerable that just makes me laugh out loud because it's just the absurdity of being human sometimes, and it's such a typical experience that I think we've created these restrictions on what we're able to express, but then it only ends up restricting us. And there's something really, I don't know, there can be something, the more we limit of what we're willing to even acknowledge or see in ourselves, I think that's what people feel a lot of shame for, because we have a template of a human being that you're supposed to be like. But really, on the inside, that's not what I'm experiencing. I'm still having thoughts, I'm still having judgments, desires. And without realizing those are just really normal aspects of being human, they can be very crippling in that sense, I find.
I think people are afraid. They've held it up too long that if they let even a little bit out, it's all coming out. And that's actually true. You know, like I'd never really indulged in any kind of introspection, and then I started meditating, and my demons kicked the door in,
Yeah.
and sent me to hell for 3 years. Right? And so there are risks here. There are risks to openness. There are risks to being too open. There are risks to losing your discernment. But there's no risk, not much risk, to sitting in front of someone doing a value judgment as to whether you think they can handle it and opening your heart to them. And if they're someone you thought was a good friend and you open up and they don't respond, like maybe they're not a good friend.
For you, when you've talked about even just the sense of, okay, does the universe love me? Then noticing these things where if I if I go out into the world and if I look for attractors to what I love and I follow this and I trust myself and I find the universe is responding to me. Is this what allowed you then? Like, is it enough experiences of that even just to step into what you're doing at the leading edge then? Or is that was that even a leap into the dark for you? Or were you feeling like this was a kind of a sequential step at this point in time?
Yes. Everything. Um, I currently earn 5% of what I earned when I was 28.
Right.
Um, but I'm probably 4 times happier. I'm fortunate that my wife earns enough um, that I can take this risk temporarily. I'm fortunate that I don't want anything apart from that flow. Um, but I'm also fortunate that my wife doesn't either. You know, we went back and forth about whether we want to have a lake house up in upstate New York, and we decided we don't because we didn't use it. So as a result, in our mid-40s, you know, as long as we've got our kids' college sorted out, which I think we roughly have, at least we will by the time they're 18, we're kind of done because both of us are so happy in our flows that we don't need much else. And I then had a lot of the other stuff was kind of in my head. You know, the last 8 months of my job at my previous employers were fantastic. They basically gave me 3 years to follow my bliss, to do whatever I wanted. But I increasingly got less and less interested in finance. Like I'm really interested in finance people. I love finance people. Yeah, there are some psychopaths. Yeah, there are more psychopaths than most normal industries. But actually, most people in finance are pretty cool. And I still really love people in finance. I know that's kind of a weird thing to say, but I do believe it. Um, and then stuff started happening at work to make me incrementally more uncomfortable. And ordinarily, I would have got bitter about that. And then I realized it was grace. That if you're being too rigid in your ability to explore a new niche, then the universe will make your life increasingly uncomfortable. And it'll often fire you, right? You often get fired from jobs. And I meet a lot of people, I speak to a lot of people in transition. A lot of people have been fired from multiple jobs and they think that they're massive failures. And actually, they're not. They just keep getting kicked out of places that are too small. So I wasn't being fired, but I was in this situation where things were getting incrementally more uncomfortable. At the same time, my work felt less and less of my work felt like it was coming directly through me. It felt like it was being kind of channeled by stuff that I really, really, really cared about. And it was getting weird, man. Like if anyone's read any of my work since the start of the year, it's weird, like unashamedly weird. There's some esoteric stuff in there. And then over the last 3 years, people kept coming to me and being like, as I said after those podcasts, was like, okay, cool. So I'm in transition, or I'm really curious about the stuff you're talking about. What do I do next? And I'm like, I got nothing for you, man. Like, yeah, I'll talk to you for as long as I can, but I got a job. And so a couple of months ago, I said, I'm going to create a container. I'm going to cap it at 150 people, which is Dunbar's number, which the moment you go over, everything falls apart. And then I'm going to fill that container with love. The best content I've ever found about the stuff we're talking about, the best practitioners I've ever found, whether it's breath work or IFS or whatever hot modality, I don't care, as long as the person practicing it is good and has some sort of lineage and context and grounding, so that if people are interested in it, they can go to someone that's good. And I have no financial relationship with those people. They're mostly just friends. And then most importantly, so those people can find each other. So I've spent the last few months interviewing applicants. We're basically nearly full, but I priced it at not very much money so that my earnings are capped, but maybe there'll be other ways of me making money. But the idea wasn't necessarily to make money. It was to create something that people had already always asked for. And one of those things is a container. And just to go on a little side rant, one of the problems of society is that we don't pay for containers, that there's a structural disrespect of anything archetypally feminine, whether it's like caring professions, intuition, creativity, anything slightly chaotic and unpredictable. And one of those things is a container where I'm like, I'm providing a space for really cool people and for this love to be provided in it. And I'm going to sit there and matchmake everyone their needs for that container. I want people to pay for it. Not very much, but I want people to pay for it so that they value it, so that we can get into this mode of valuing containers. So that's what I've done. And the last thing I'll say is I'm just doing an 8-part series on accelerating wisdom, which doesn't mean hacking wisdom. It means paying real attention to bootstrapping our humanity. Because I've read 100,000 articles about how we're doomed because of AI, and I've read nothing about, so what? What are you going to do to really lean into what makes you a human being? Not necessarily for professional or productivity purposes, but like to make you more of a person, to make you more differentiated into yourself and more integrated into your environment, which is what we're basically talking about.
That's a beautiful observation, by the way, on the fact that we're not looking to pay for containers. And to me, it almost speaks to the idea that we're more than willing to pay for nefarious short term fixes, but we're not willing to pay for either someone's presence to hold a container or the container itself, in which the random, sometimes chaotic, fluctuating things that need to occur for ourselves, that they can take place in a helpful environment.
A womb's just a dead empty space, right? A womb's not valuable. Women aren't doing anything. They're just growing something in their womb, right? That's almost like the attitude that this is, right? Which is that like, no, it's not just a dead empty space. It's something into which life can grow. And actually people need to build that into their lives, I've realized. And that's something I'm also creating, which is like, you're different to me. And actually the more you evolve, the more different you're going to get from me, and the more different you're going to get from everyone else. So like the real danger here is that I basically become a cult leader by saying, here's the Tom method, right? Here's the Morgan method, right? Which is this proven route to self-determination. And that actually can be dark because it's one, I have information you don't have, but it's also assuming that there's one route for everyone. And yeah, there are commonalities and there are tools and there are things that work better than others. But what I want to do is create a restaurant where like everyone in there's really cool, right? We have a great door policy, so no one else gets into the restaurant unless they're really, really cool. and you can sit at any table you want with whoever you want, but you're going to eat off a menu where everything's really good. And everyone wants to eat something different. That's fine. And there's a guy called John Vervaeke who I would recommend people follow. He's a bit thinky and a bit abstract, but he seems to be the most grounded wisdom expert I'm aware of right now. And he talks about this need for an ecology of practices embedded in the community, where like you need a bunch of different things. On Wall Street, it was like, okay, I'm going to do Wim Hof breath work because it is the most intense form, getting the most results the quickest. And then a few months later, everyone's taping their mouths shut because they read a book about breathing. And then a few months later, they're doing something else. And a few months later, and that's this very left hemispheric way of extracting things from context, like dialing them up to 11 and then seeing if they work and then discarding them. And I'm not saying don't try things, but you need to have this dynamic ecology, but also test them with other people where it's like, dude, is this working for you? Like, is this for me? And I've got to a stage where everything I do is for intrinsic benefit. So I do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is my embodiment practice. It makes me incredibly happy. And I would go if it were not a productivity thing. I DJ because I really enjoy that and it puts me in flow. When I write, I have melodic house music on, which I love that, right? Like I have my flow generators. I get a massage once a week. I have this ecology of practices where everything's dynamic and supports everything else. Like if I get injured, I've got the DJing. And then I also have a community of people that I can try things out with. And if you don't have those, I'm not saying my community is better than others. My community is very small and it's going to be closed pretty soon. But like find one.
But I think there's and you're touching on it even at capping that at 150, there's a problem with scale, isn't there? Like people are looking to say that they have a solution for everything. And it almost does the very opposing thing of, instead of supporting or someone's flourishing or their uniqueness, it looks to constrain or box it off in very convenient ways. Just wanted to go back to something that you mentioned that resonates a lot with my experience too, of just taking some severe pay cuts essentially in ways, and almost how you construct your days resonates as well in terms of either what brings you flow. Like obviously there seems to be a lot of like love inherent in that process as well. A lot of spontaneity and synchronicity is also potential from that. But the part that I want to go back to initially was, how did you navigate the space of I don't have a one liner or a one word answer to the question of what do you do professionally? Like how did you kind of just handle that transition initially, or what made you what gave you comfort in navigating that terrain?
I still don't have a solution to that. Now, Kevin Kelly has this great line where it's like, you want to be doing a job for which there are no words because it shows you're on the edge. When I was unemployed in Manhattan, on and off, seeking different jobs for 3 years, every time anyone asked me any questions, even remotely related to profession, which is usually the first or second question they ask you in Manhattan, I was like, oh God, that person judges me so hard. And it was shameful every single time. And then when I was on the other side of it, I couldn't explain what I did, and I was the happiest I'd ever been. I realized I couldn't answer that question, but also the person didn't care in both situations.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's this joke where like everyone should arrange a party where everyone goes into a room and you do a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation on what you do for a living. Right. Like no one knows what anyone else does for a living, and it doesn't make us bad friends. We just don't care. Yeah. Right. Even spouses often can't explain like what the other person does for a living. They just don't care. And so I have like shorthands. But even now, like I've been doing this business for 2 months, and I still get a little bit worked up about the fact that I can't explain what I do. But you can just shorthand it, be like, I'm a writer, or like I'm a founder. I've founded a company, right? So, like something that you can say like really quickly. And a lot of it has like bad connotations, like, oh, I'm a podcaster. It's like, oh, great, like fine, but you enjoy it, right? Like, so part of me gets worked up about it and part of me just lets it go. If someone's going to give me more than 30 seconds, I can tell them about it. And there's certain people who, when at a certain time of life, who I explain this to, immediately gets it. And anyone that doesn't get it probably isn't the kind of person that I want to talk to about it anyway. If you're talking to someone who's like, 60 years old and completely different focus of all these things. They're just like, great, I don't care, you know.
I think it's a I think it's a wonderful practice in self acceptance and also acceptance of others as well. Like, you know, even when you identified a group there that just probably won't appreciate it, or they'll struggle to get it. I don't have to convince someone of this, or, you know, also as well, I don't even have to convince myself of what I'm doing if life just feels this good. Just really intrigued though. What do you think, was it the intensity of some of these experiences? Was it almost almost the blowing open of the doors at times that then led you to not caring so much about like some of the more material things in life, like not judging that as good or bad? Like, you know, anyone can pursue what they want to, but for you, what what released your kind of grip of that, or was that something that was generally like loosely held by you?
It's a cliche, but it was dying. I
Right.
lost everything, lost absolutely everything. My wife saw me dwindle to nothing and lose all my humanity. I lost all my success. I lost my soul. I lost my brain. I lost my voice. Um, I was nothing. Like if you had met me back then, you know, my hair was all over the place. At one point I got exceptionally bad full facial acne from the drug side effects that I was on. You know, if I didn't have means, I probably would have been out on the street. I was a complete non-functioning human. Um, and when you've hit that, your requirements for life get a lot lower. Um, and the concept of gratitude journals really annoy me. I don't know why. I can't explain why.
Same.
And the idea of like be grateful for all of this sort of stuff, live every day as if it was your last. Like no one actually lives like that, or if they did, they'd be incredibly annoying people. But the cliche is true that one for 2 years I lived unable to feel anything. So like one weekend, my sister came to visit me because she knew I was in a bad way, and she took me to 11 Madison Park, the best restaurant in Manhattan, maybe one of the best in the world. And then we went to see Dunkirk, one of my favorite movies, on the deck of the aircraft carrier, the Intrepid, moored off Hell's Kitchen. And then the next day, we watched my team Liverpool win the Champions League final. And then we went to Madison Square Garden to watch the boxing, and I love boxing, to watch Anthony Joshua fight. Um, and I went back up to the deck of the Intrepid with my wife just recently for a charity event. And we're sitting on the top of this aircraft carrier, looking back across this beautiful skyline of Hell's Kitchen. And I said to her, last time I was here, the only thing I could feel, and you know what my family was calling the weekend of weekends because it was so beautiful, the only thing I could feel was burning in my chest. Only thing. I had no connection to anything except this constant dull burning and sense of utter abstraction from everything. And when you walk up there a second time and you can feel and see everything, you can always remember what it's like to feel nothing. And that contrast is incredible. And she turned to me, and it was really the first time she said she understood what was going on. She was like, "What could I have done?" And I said, "Nothing. There was probably nothing you could have done."
That's absolutely fucking beautiful.
Thank you.
There's that's there's so many layers to that, obviously, but even just the acknowledgement that your wife probably couldn't have done anything. You know, like there's and just the sheer like high after high after high that you would almost be expecting to be experiencing, and then yet all there was the burning in the chest.
Hell is nothing. Hell is, you know, there's this constant theme that evil is a falling away from goodness. And hell almost for me wasn't constant pain. It was just total, total separation from everything, from every relationship, from love. There was no love of anything in my life.
I, I think there's something beautiful though that it seems to occur for you in that in these experience insights occur. Um, Life reveals itself to you almost, or that there's a sense of relating with life, like, and even then to go to that far away from connection, And then to be coming back then with the question of, does the universe love me? Like it seems to have left you with some really beautiful quests or questions to determine or to engage with.
Yeah, I mean, I met a guy on the other side of the dark night of the soul who was like, we could have had you out of there in an hour and a half. And part of me was like, well, that would have been nice to know. And then another part of me was like, no, thank you. And absolutely would not have been saying thank you at the time. It was literally like being in hell for more than 2 years. I went to hell for 2 years. The closest, like a hell that is unimaginable to anyone that has not experienced something like it, where you lose everything and you're in constant suffering. Not only is it, more than 2 years, but every minute feels like 100,000 years. You lose any sense of time because you're suffering so badly. The best time of your day is like that 1.5 seconds before your consciousness switches on at the start of every day, where suddenly you're out from under it and then bang, it's back on top of you again. And there's not a day that goes by that I'm not grateful for it. And the reason why I'm talking to you right now is the reason I'm talking to everyone, which is if someone is in this, some variant of this, is it gets better. But often not does it just get better. You are better on the other side of this than you were going in. And our mental health paradigm is so broken that I was told over and over again. I was told professionally there's no reinvention, and I was told mentally you are in symptom management mode. And I'm only married because my wife has a greater sense of duty than most women I know. But she was like, if I can get 30% of my husband back through meds or whatever, I'll stay. But she was playing for 30%. So when now, like, I'm like, Diane, like, I'm going to zero out my salary for a few months and try my new business venture. She's like, roll those dice, baby. like no one cares anymore. Right. Like she doesn't care. Like what, worst case, we go live with my mother. I mean, I would kill myself if I had to live with her mother. Just kidding. If you're listening, she's not listening. She definitely does not listening to this, but you know what I mean, right? It is the Fight Club cliche, is that you're only free to do everything after you've lost anything after you lost everything.
But I just, life keeps showing me that I think that's just inherently true, and it's the things that we hold on to and trying to avoid defeat. Like even going back to the start when you were saying that there could be people in loveless marriages there, which is also just a representation of almost how they feel in their roles as well. Like that's the thing that can be killing us sometimes. The just coming into absolute contact with the reality of life, as painful as it may be, it can also just be a wonderful, I don't know, release. And I'm not trying to make silver line anyone's deep struggles, if you know what I mean. And at the same time, it seems to be the bedrock of so many wonderful things of people that I've encountered either through this podcast or just in deep and kind of meaningful conversations that I have outside of this as well.
Well, you ask what question people have at the start. The other question that I have that I've been wrestling with for a really long time, and I don't think I'm ever going to get an answer to, is what level of suffering is necessary?
Yeah.
So like the reason why I've started my business is that, like I see everything now through this lens of the hero's journey, which I'm not going to go into because it would take forever. But like when you hear the call to adventure, it is through curiosity. And it is this inexplicable, non-rational pull towards something. And in our society, due to the way that we've structured everything, we can't follow that. And we don't trust it because it's not seemingly leading anywhere, because it's non-rational. Whereas I've believed that pull often comes with a much higher degree of intelligence and agency than we would ordinarily believe. So like, you asked me like what I would like. I was like, I just want people to have a little bit more faith in that, just to pursue it. Like, don't burn your life down, right? Like, bring your discernment into this relationship as well. Like you can make a lot of mistakes, and I've made a lot of mistakes having like the opposite end of like the universe loves me, I'm going to be fine. It was not fine, right? Like this is not a recipe to do stupid things. It's a marginal shift a marginal shift that if you're dying inside, or you've really stagnated, or you've hit a wall, or even you're just a little curious about something, amplify that subtle sense and be really curious about it, and then follow that curiosity wherever it takes you, and understand that it may be leading you with a really great environmental intelligence. And what has that got to do with suffering? It's like the way the hero's journey goes is it's call to adventure, refusal of the call because it seems dumb, and then crisis.
Yeah.
That if you don't follow that call, you can end up killing yourself. That sounds hyperbolic, but I've seen it a lot, right? Like more than once, that you end up in this physical and mental health crisis like I was in, or you believe there are no options left for you, or you believe that the better option for your family is that you're dead. And so I'm like, I can't go on anyone's spiritual journey for them. And I'm not even sure when they're in the abyss I can do much to help them other than hold their hand and just let them know that maybe it will end at some point, which isn't very comforting. But it's that initial period where it's like you're being called, you hear something, trust it.
It's a funny question. I have that in my mind as well, just in terms of the almost the tipping point, or why some people still, it's enough to propel them, and for some it may just it may just remain a buzzing or annoying kind of sensation, rather than this kind of painful thrusting you out beyond your current restraints or comfort. Look, Tom, just looking at the time here, and the, where you started this off with, like, does the universe love me? So many ideas around synchronicity, that being almost reciprocal love as well, flow of consciousness being an expression of this love, your story of just what you've experienced, either through some of the, the biggest separation you felt from either connection or love or life, to also experiences that almost feel like almost supernatural in terms of just then the absolute connection to people, like just the wild swings within that, the idea of stepping away from something that no longer fulfills you into something that you love, the willingness to embrace uncertainty within that, to just be an expression of this thing, to notice what occurs in life, or what the universe, how that responds to us when we do such a thing, the stepping away even just from the material pursuit, just based on the context of what the experiences you had as well, and how that was that played out. And also just this beautiful idea, or this image of how the role your wife has played in this as well, of being supportive, being loving, and just a coalescing of values there as well. Just really intrigued to ask you, Tom, the question of what is a good life for you?
It's where you're doing what you feel only you can do meets what the world needs. It really is. Like, you spend your life in full flow, and you're getting constant feedback that that's the right thing you should be doing. There's nothing else that matters, because you'll be living in abundance, unpredictable abundance. You have no idea where you're going next, but you don't really care because the ride is so enjoyable.
Yeah, I have nothing further to add to that. I think that's succinctly and perfectly summed up. And I love the idea of unpredictable abundance, and almost that abundance being a feeling of life, even more so than the usual ways in which we measure it. Tom, look, thank you so much for this conversation today. I found it absolutely fascinating. There's lots that you'll have left me with to contemplate as well. So thank you very much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast.
Thanks for having me.